Hello everyone, Juxtaposition here. Today's video will be entitled Dianna Rossini Scandal Metaphor. Because I'm not picking on Dianna Rossini, age 43 today, but I am riding her wave into the corruption that is our mainstream media and throughout journalism. All forms of journalism, so-called. Because I'm here to tell you there's no journalists involved with being employed on the payroll to provide what we call gumshoe detecting, sleuthing, Nancy Drewisms, Joe Hardy, Frank Hardy of the Hardy Boys, uh, Peter Falk Columbo, Lieutenant Columbo. There's no gumshoe detectives on the job in the news media. And Dianna Rossini is in the Roman circus division. The media is broken into many different pieces, almost all of which have to do with entertainment or salacious gossip, because that's how the sheep on the reservation in the Hunger Game, in the Swiss Hunger Game in which you live in a Swiss Hunger Game, you are addicted and drawn um, to You are addicted and drawn to gossip, rumor, innuendo, and salacious material, salacious content, right? And of course, Hollywood and the British Broadcasting Company and all stage managers and producers of theatrical plays, stage productions, everyone knows that. They know that in the opera, they know that at the symphony, and they know that at your local sitcom TV show that's loaded with cue cards and teleprompters, right? Everybody knows that sex sells. And so does rumor, gossip, innuendo, and unsubstantiated poppycock. And by the way, that's the pillars of foundation if you should choose to run for mayor of your hamlet, of your strategic hamlet, you want to be the city mayor, or if you want to run for the city of New York, the mayor of the city of New York, or get on the board of supervisors for New York. And if you want to be the gubernator of your state, take some steroids, lift some weights, and become a gubernator like Arnold Schwarzenegger of Austria did, you don't have to be from California. You don't have to be from California to be the governor of California. Ronald Reagan was from Illinois. Arnold Schwarzenegger's from Austria, right? Who cares about being local? Barbara Boxer, she's a Jew from Brooklyn. She became a United States Senator of California, and she's from Brooklyn, New York, right? Bernie Sanders, he's a Jew from Brooklyn, New York. He became the senator from Vermont. It makes sense, right? You don't need to be from the state that you hijack. All right. I'm going to feature some so-called sports journalists today to use as comparisons to the 43-year-old babe in the woods, the lost babe in the woods who's been thrown onto the railroad track, like Nell. Uh, Dianna Marie Rossini. She's 43 years old. But I'm going to go down the list here of some more adult supervision. Dan Patrick, he's from Ohio, and he's made a career out of sports entertainment reporting. I do want to emphasize sport entertainment. Dan Patrick does not report on sports whatsoever. He's in the entertainment business. He knows basketball, he knows baseball, he knows football, and he knows how to entertain. And he's an entertaining guy. He worked for ESPN Disney for 18 years before they had a falling out. Now he has his own Dan Patrick podcast. But make no mistake, he was fully indoctrinated, fully controlled, fully compromised by Disney Corporation. They owned him for 18 years. Dan Patrick, he's 69 years old today. All right. And then the next person I'm going to mention is Keith Oberman. Okay. He's from New York and New York City. And he is a pompous ass. And he worked for ESPN for 8 years. And he always had to chime in on any woke messaging. Okay. He's 67 years old today. But while he was at ESPN and after he left ESPN, he always had to throw his opinion into the Donald Trump presidency, the Donald Trump assassination, the Charlie Kirk pseudo fake assassination, the COVID hoax, the COVID-19 vax mandates, which Keith Olbermann pimped and promoted. He always had to be involved with Bill O'Reilly and Janine Garofalo and Al Franken, a Jew from New York who became a senator from Minnesota, Al Franken, right? And Keith Olbermann is cloaked in politics and in conservative ism and versus liberalism. He is associated with Al Franken. How's everything affecting Al Franken, who's a complete, fraud himself, an unfunny Jewish comedian from New York who becomes a senator from Minnesota. And there's Keith Olbermann having him on his show. Okay, then currently we have Rich Eisen, who lives in Coldwater Canyon in Beverly Hills. I have clients in there too. Rich Eisen is a Jew from Brooklyn, New York, right? And he's 56 years old today, and he's had his career based on ESPN and Disney. He's worked for Disney, ESPN for 8 years. He left them and created his own podcast, and now he's been back united with ESPN through the partnership with NFL football. So essentially, you know that Rich Eisen is all about concealing steroid use, amphetamines, and the rigging of games, and the bad officiating calls, which is bad officiating deliberately on purpose to fix games. That way, the players don't have to fix the games. The zebras with the stripes, the black and white stripes, they can fix the game that you're gambling on. And you know that NFL football promotes gambling and promotes steroids and promotes violence. And Rich Eisen does too. He wouldn't have his job if he wasn't a pimp for violence and doping. He's just a pimp for violence and doping. And he's mostly a pimp for not talking about it, right? And he is a big concealment artist of the scandal involving Dianna Marie Rossini. He doesn't want to talk about it. He said it's between two consenting adults who appear to be cheating on their spouses with each other, and it's really none of their business. But it's not about cheating on your spouses. That's not the story. The story is, can you believe anything that a field reporter or a writer or a columnist who writes about steroid sports like football, like Dianna Rossini presents, like Rich Eisen presents, okay, can you believe anything that comes out of their mouth? And I think the answer is crystal clear. No, you can't believe anything that Rich Eisen says about anything. He's got a whole parade of Hollywood Screen Actor Guild actors appearing on his show because his show is all about entertainment, ESPN, which was run by Michael Eisner, who was dating Faye Resnick during the O.J. Simpson trial, for crying out loud. Faye Resnick was living on Michael Eisner's home in Bel Air. She's living on his property. And neither Michael Eisner, who is the chairman of the board of Disney Corporation, he wasn't called as a witness in the O.J. Simpson murder case. And he wasn't, and they very conveniently excluded the woman who's living on his property, Faye Resnick, who knows oodles of information about Nicole Brown Simpson and O.J. Simpson, and yet was not called as a material witness in that murder case. And then after Michael Eisner left, who's a Jewish boy from New York, we had Bob Iger, and he's another Jewish guy from New York, and he is the current CEO and chairman of the board of Disney, who is Rich Eisner's boss, Rich Eisen's boss. I get them confused. There's Michael Eisner and Rich Eisen. And Michael Eisner lived in Bel Air, and Rich Eisen lives in Beverly Hills, not far away, about 3.5 miles to the east, Coldwater Canyon. All right. So the striking thing to me is when you get into looking at sports journalists, which yours truly here has personal experience. Let me give you some names of people who are about my age, who I've spent time with helping them write their stories because they didn't know anything about sports. Gwen Knapp, I spent the most time with her. She's from Harvard University. She was a editor for the Harvard Crimson Gazette newspaper in charge of sports for Harvard and for sports reporting at Harvard. And she had her own column for the Hearst Family Examiner out here in San Francisco, Gwen Knapp. She had her own column, and I helped her when she went after Lance Armstrong and doping. Of course, I did ask her, are you going to go after Joe Montana and the Mormon Steve Young LDS Church, who's on a boatload of steroids also? And how about baseball? How about the San Francisco Giants? How about the Golden State Warriors? How about Rick Barry, who lives in Alamo at the Round Hill Country Club? Are you going to go after Rick Barry? Are you going to go after Reggie Jackson? Are you going to go after Mark McGuire? Are you going to go after Tony La Russa? They all are involved with doping and cheating, and they are all aware of fixing games, basketball games, baseball games, and football games. And of course, the resounding answer is no, we're not going to do an article about that, right? I said, are you going to go after Jesuit high schools that provide steroids for their football team and their track team? No, we're not going to go after that. I said, well, I know a lot about that, but we don't want to talk about it. Okay. Then through Gwen Knapp, she introduced me to Lance Williams and Mark Fain Aru Wada. If you remember, they quote, broke the Balco steroids case, which is not nothing like you think it was, involving the bass player of Tower of Power, for crying out loud, that he was the genius behind selling steroids to Tim Montgomery, the world's fastest man, and Marion Jones and Bill Romanowski of the San Francisco 49ers, and the bass player from a rock band is the drug dealer for professional athletes in the Olympics and San Francisco Bay Area sporting teams. Anyway, they ended up writing a book entitled Game of Shadows, except I'm here to tell you that none of this is in the shadows. The shadow is cast, the line between the gray and black latitude, the shadow is cast by the Hearst family newspaper chain. It's cast by ABC Sports. It's cast by Monday Night Football, Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, Disney Corporation, Bruce Jenner, Al Michaels, Howard Cosell, Frank Gifford. In other words, all of the people who appear on television or on radio, on sports talk radio, or have columns in the San Francisco Examiner or The Athletic, which is the New York Times, or are expert field level reporters who are interviewed on various shows for CBS Sports, NBC Sports, ABC Sports, or ESPN. They're the shadows. They're the ones that cast the shadows. They're trying to tell the audience what's going on in sports. But you don't hear Rich Eisen talking about amphetamine abuse, steroids, blood doping in the sports that he covers. And when he has guests on his show, which are either comedians or Hollywood actors or steroid athletes, he doesn't bring up steroids. He doesn't bring up rigged games. He doesn't bring up point spreads that are doctored. He doesn't bring up the corruption that is professional sport and college sport, where allegedly the players aren't supposed to be getting paid, but they are getting paid, and we don't talk about it on the Rich Eisen show. All right, he's a big University of Michigan pimp. All right. So what I want you to know, and we do know that University of Michigan is as corrupt as you can get, and that's Rich Eisen's, where he got a Bachelor of Arts degree before he went on to get a master's degree. I met Ken Rosenthal, who works again for the New York Times and The Athletic, just like Dianna Rossini did, and I met him to discuss steroids in baseball, and we talked on the phone. We didn't meet in person. He was in Florida. I was in Sacramento at the time we talked. Ray Ratto, he is a Alameda County, Alameda City, East Bay radio personality. He has a column. He writes for ESPN and CBS Sports, CanBR Radio, and television. He appears as guest for NBC Sports on television and radio, and his articles can be seen at ESPN and CBS and KNBR. And Ray Ratto is a pimp for steroids and rigged games. He does not discuss it. He does concealment for it. I wrote him. We had an email exchange, the two of us, and he agreed 100% with me and said, "You'll never see that on my show." He didn't say I was wrong. He just said we're not going to cover that because he has to swim in this polluted cesspool that people like Seymour Hersh do, Bob Woodward, Carl Bernstein, Lawrence Schiller, Ed Sanders, Vincent Bugliosi, Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, Andrea Mitchell, okay, Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, David Brinkley, Chet Huntley, Frank Reynolds, Tucker Carlson, Anderson Cooper, Glenn Greenwald. They are all concealment artists. The number one way that you lie to the public is by not reporting on a story. Look, I'm wearing my gumshoe, Humphrey Bogart, 1943 circa gumshoe detective hat here. I know I was an auditor. I was an auditor. I was never a journalist. Isn't it ironic that I ended up working with Gwen Knapp, Lance Williams, Mark Fainer Wada, helped them write a book called Game of Shadows, that I worked with Ken Rosenthal and Ray Ratto, who have 30-year careers concealing doping in sports. And yet all those people agreed with me off camera, off camera. But when they present, they minimize, or they isolate. They do what I refer to as scapegoat hunters. They're all scapegoat hunters. They went after Barry Bonds, okay, and they scapegoated him for steroids in baseball. When Pete Rose used steroids, okay? When Willie Mays used steroids, when Joe DiMaggio used amphetamines. I mean, every baseball player in history uses illegal drugs without a prescription. If you don't have a prescription for them, they're illegal. And by the way, sometimes they do have prescriptions called a TUI, therapeutic use exemption. It's a way to take drugs and legally, even though you don't really need to use those drugs. But cortisone and antidepressant drugs and morphine is very helpful when you have to play sports injured, or if you have fractured bones and you still have to play, or you have a concussion and you still have to play. Does anyone really believe Howard Cosell, another Jew from New York who was presented to us on Monday Night Football, along with Al Michaels, along with Frank Gifford? Do you believe Frank Gifford? I mean, his ex-wife doesn't believe him. He's cheating on her every chance he gets. So if you look at people like Frank Gifford and you look at people like O.J. Simpson, who was personal friends with Al Michaels, and O.J. Simpson works for ABC, and Al Michaels works for ABC Disney, and Michael Eisner is the chairman of ABC Disney, while Al Michaels and O.J. Simpson and Bruce Jenner, Caitlin, they're all buds. They're all friends. They all appear on ABC sporting shows like Monday Night Football. Do you believe any of them? I don't. I never did. There was never a time that I trusted Al Michaels or that I trusted Howard Cosell or that I trusted Bruce Caitlin Jenner. I never trusted him. And I never trusted Bob Iger and I never trusted Michael Eisner. And I certainly don't trust Rich Eisen, Keith Oberman, and Dan Patrick. I do watch their shows. I do. Not religiously, but I do watch their shows, and they're good at what they do. Their medium is to cast a shadow of the black and gray latitudes onto all the corruption that exists in sports. But I'm here to tell you, so does Bob Woodward, so does Carl Bernstein, so does Seymour Hersh, who got a Pulitzer Prize for plagiarism, Lawrence Schiller, Ed Sanders, Vincent Bugliosi, who didn't handle the Manson case. It was Aaron Stovich who handled the trial. It was Vincent Bugliosi who spent 30 years lying about what happened. He was the public relations arm for the Manson family. Okay? In other words, he's fake. Vincent Bugliosi is fake. We know he's an adulterer, and we know that he punches women who are pregnant and breaks their nose. That's what we know about Vincent Bugliosi. In other words, he's a criminal, but he's never been convicted of his crimes. His biggest crime is that he's a bald-faced liar. Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, David Brinkley, Chet Huntley, Frank Reynolds, Tucker Carlson, Anderson Cooper, they're all bald-faced liars too, but they haven't been arrested and arraigned and convicted yet. All right, so we're talking about Dianna Rossini, who's having an affair with Mark Grable, who's 50 years old, 7 years older than her. And her initial reaction is just like you hear Rich Eisen, which is you deny it. You just deny it. Steroids in baseball, just deny it. There's no proof, and we have doping controls, even though Rich Eisen has no idea that there's no doping controls. He's probably doesn't even know that it's just fake, right? I mean, he's fake. His career is fake. He married a woman, Susie Schuster. She's fake. She worked for ESPN too. He's fishing off the company pier. Do you see that Rich Eisen got his wife at work? She works for ESPN. All right. Do you see that Dianna Rossini had an affair with Mike Rabel through work, through staying at the hotels and traveling with the football teams? That's how she did it. She worked for ESPN for 8 years. Rich Eisen, he worked for ESPN for 8 years. Susie Schuster worked for ESPN for an unknown amount of time. I'm going to say at least 3 years. And that's how they cheat, right? They cheat because they are on an expense account and they're at hotels and they're lonely. All right. So did Dan Patrick get busted for this? No. Did Keith Oberman get busted for cheating and adultery? No. Has Rich Eisen been caught yet? No. Is it possible that he, may have engaged in that earlier in his career before he was married? Absolutely. Absolutely. You see it all the time. We don't talk about the Mark Sanchez scandal. And Mark Sanchez is a prime example of what can happen when you're on the road and you drink too much, right? All right. So anyway, what we know, there's a code of omerta, and all these reporters, whether it's Dan Patrick, Keith Oberman, Rich Eisen, or Dianna Rossini, uh, they all keep secrets. They don't rat each other out. And most of them worked at ESPN or at the New York Times, like Mark Fainorotta did. Where did he go to work after he busted the San Francisco Giants and the Balco case? He went to work at ESPN, where he's been for 18 years. Here's the big steroid whistleblower, and then he's rewarded with a job at the number one concealment artist of steroids, Disney ESPN. What a hypocrite. If Mark Fainorotta really cared about doping in sports, he certainly wouldn't take a job at ESPN Disney. But you know what? He likes the money. And his partner, Lance Williams, much to his credit, he didn't go to ESPN. He went to what's called California Watch, where he allegedly is an investigative journalist. If you believe that, I'll sell you a bridge for $50 a month. It's called the Golden Gate Bridge. I'll sell you a bridge. Gwen Knapp went on to work for the New York Times after she left the Hearst Corporation Examiner, and she became an editor at the New York Times, which is a bald-faced lying firm that pimped and promoted Pulitzer Prize plagiarist Seymour Hearst. So my friend Gwen Knapp, in the end, she took the money and she moved to New York. And she's a Harvard alum. And she's in the concealment business of doping in sports because she was only interested in Lance Armstrong and no one else, even though there are thousands of people involved with doping in sports. But only Gwen was interested in the Nike icon, um, Lance Gunderson Farmstrong. Gwen didn't even know his name was Gunderson. I have to tell these people everything. You have to know people, the people like Rich Eisner and Dan Patrick and Keith Oberman, the astounding little that they know about sports. Dan Patrick played basketball, I believe, in college. He must know more than the average sports reporter. But that said, it's startling how little of their knowledge is expressed on their own shows. They dominantly don't talk about how sports works. They talk about how it doesn't work. Like that's the way it is. Not. Remember Walter Cronkite? He'd always end his broadcast with CBS News as, and that's the way it is, or that's the way it was. And, the thing is that that's never how it is because Walter Cronkite is a huge concealment artist. All right, now let's focus and circle the wagons back here to Dianna because she was the clickbait for today's show. The show's not really about her. She's only 43 years old. And people, look, I'm a little older, not my first rodeo. So if you're a 43-year-old private banker, or you're a 43-year-old scientist at the Lawrence Livermore Weapons Lab, or you're a 43-year-old professor at UC Berkeley or MIT, or you're a managing director of a hedge fund and you're 43 years old, juxtaposition is not going to take you super seriously because you're too young. You really don't understand how the world works, and you're very, very indoctrinated. So if you're younger, you're listening to my show and you're younger than 43 years old, you should know that while I respect that you're eager and you want to know and you're curious, and I do respect that, I remember what I was like when I was 43. And believe me, I had a lot of a work experience. I met a lot of famous people, including George Shultz, Caspar Weinberger, Ronald Reagan, Johnny Carson, Doc Severinsen, Zsa Zsa Gabor, the president of the World Bank, Tom Clausen, the president of Bank of America, Sam Armacost. I knew and met those people, shook their hands, and spent time with them. But I was clueless of how to connect the dots at age 43. And Dianna Rossini, I don't even think she understands how the industry can grind you up like sausage and spit you out. And, I'm sure she's an eager beaver. It appears she is an adulteress, though. I don't think there's any question about that. She is cheating. She has two sons who are age 4 and 6, and it is unclear to me who the father is. It is entirely possible that Mike Vrabel is the father of her two children. You do know that her eldest son was born while she was dating Mike Vrabel, who was married, 25-year marriage, and she's dating him. He's 6'4", 265 pounds. She's more of a petite former soccer player that she played in college for soccer. And then in a whirlwind romance and Zoom wedding, she marries Kevin Goldschmidt, who is a senior vice president for Shake Shack in New York City. He's an executive for Shake Shack. It's a franchise. And she doesn't even hardly know this guy. She knows Mike Grable, who's married, and she's dating him when she gets a Zoom marriage where not a single person of her family and not a single person of Kevin Goldsmith's family appeared at their wedding on Zoom. They got married on September 26, 2020, during the height of the COVID pandemic. That's the fraud that is Dianna Rossini. That's why Juxtaposition is going to call the marriage to Kevin Goldschmidt fake. If you got married on Zoom with no wedding guests and no wedding gifts and no ceremony other than, the Zoom protocol with the AI assistant, I'm calling that marriage fake. Okay. So, but it's being presented that you have a marriage certificate. I don't know if you do or you don't, but I do know you're dating a married man. So you are participating in an adulterous relationship during 2020 before you were pregnant. And you got pregnant after you got married, but it's unclear to me whether it was Kevin Goldschmidt who was the daddy, the baby daddy, or if it's Michael Grable who was the baby daddy, or perhaps any one of a dozen other coaches or sources for your gossip column. Dianna Rossini is presented to us as an American sports journalist for the National Football League, NFL reporter, and insider, right? She's an insider. Lord have mercy. She's sleeping with the coach, so that would make her super insider, right? And she works for the New York Times now through The Athletic. But previously, she'd worked for 8 years at ESPN in football, in steroid football. Make no mistake, you're talking about a dope, dirty sport, and that she is sleeping with a doped, dirty former football player who is now the coach of the New England Patriots. And he's probably on a boatload of drugs too to date her and to do his job as a football player and to get emergency counseling with his wife of 25 years during the NFL draft weekend, the single most important weekend of the year. He has gone MIA. All right. So what I wanted you to know is that Dianna Rossini is just a little note on the network. She's not any different than Keith Oberman, Rich Eisen, who married Susie Schuster, who's a sideline reporter. That they're all clones of each other, and in a lot of ways, they're a clone of Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, who lied and torpedoed Richard Nixon, who had nothing whatsoever to do with the Watergate CIA burglary, which involve all 100% CIA burglars. They all worked for the CIA or were contractors for the CIA and had performed hundreds of burglaries before and had never been caught. Seymour Hersh, Lauren Schiller, Ed Sanders, Vincent Bugliosi, Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, Andrea Mitchell, um, Walter Cronkite, Dan Rather, David Brinkley, Chet Huntley, Frank Reynolds, Tucker Carlson, Anderson Cooper, Glenn Greenwald, Whitney Webb, RFKJ, Catherine Austin Fitz, uh, fake, 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 fake. Just like Joe Rogan is fake. Every guest who appears on his show is fake. Peter Thiel is fake. Peter Thiel has no software engineering experience, no database management experience. He's a eugenics anthropology student from Stanford University. He knows nothing about computer science at all. So he's fake, right? We know he has gay lovers who fall off their balconies and face plant into the jacuzzi in Miami at Biscayne Bay, kind of like a Johnny Roselli do-over. But Diana Roselli was born in the Bronx, but raised in Norwood, New Jersey. She attended Northern Valley Regional High School at Old Tappan. She was an all-state soccer, basketball, softball, and track athlete, which meant she probably had little time to do her homework. She played soccer for 4 seasons at George Mason University in Fairfax County, Virginia. So she's quite the athlete, and she's very busy bed hopping, it appears, but not with her husband, who is the Shake Shack executive. Dianna began her career at NBC, at WNBC in New York City. She quickly switched to move to Seattle, Washington, where she was an anchor for Comcast Sportsnet Northwest, also known as CSN Northwest. And then she worked at News 12 Westchester and NBC stations WRC TV, WNBC, WVIT. And then in July 2015, Dianna Rossini joined ESPN after the Disney executives saw her broadcast in Washington, D.C., and she greatly impressed them with her perkiness because she's very perky. Anyway, the media still wants to say that it's an alleged affair with Mike Grable and Dianna Rossini, when the facts of the matter is they're staying at over $2,000 a night boutique hotel, and adults only, no children, in Sedona, Arizona. Um, and What do you think they're doing? This is hijinks. This is canoodling. It appears to be an extramarital affair. They're both married to other people, and they're staying together alone in a bungalow with rooftop capabilities. They're also photographed in the jacuzzi. I don't care who took the pictures. The fact is, they're busted. She resigned from her job at the New York Times because she doesn't want to talk about it. First, she denied it. Then the photos came out. Then she doesn't want to talk about it anymore. So she no more denials, but she doesn't want to talk about it. So she quit her job, where we don't know what she was making. There's rumors that she was making 1.5 million a year, 2 million a year. She's probably making 250,000 a year, and then she lives for her hotel reimbursement and expenses, just like Herb Cain did. Herb Cain lived on his expense account. And Herb Cain is like Walter Winchell, right? Walter Winchell and Herb Cain are in the gossip business. They're in the gossip business. They don't really do gumshoe detective work. They're looking for items to gossip about in their columns in their newspapers. What do you think Dianna Rossini's doing? She's out bed hopping and hanging out with the boys at the bar in the hotel lobby and the hotel saloon and restaurant. And she brags about all the dinners she goes to with these executives for the NFL football and coaches and staff. And then we find out she's canoodling in Sedona, Arizona at a 2,000 plus night boutique hotel, suite, bungalow detached with a spiral staircase leading to the roof. So I'm just telling you, they all cover for each other. Rich Eisen, Keith Oberman, Dan Patrick, Dianna Rossini appeared on the Dan Patrick show in February before the scandal broke just 2 months later. So Dan Patrick is very familiar with Dianna Rossini, and you don't hear Dan Patrick delving into this story, and you don't hear Rich Eisen delving into the story because it's not about personal adultery. That's not the story. The story is that you cannot believe anything that you hear a person on television say. That's the story. Whether they're a sport reporting journalist or have their own show, including the Jim Rose show, where Jim doesn't dive into corruption in sports and baseball. He does more than anyone else. I'll give him that. But he's a Jewish boy from Calabasas, San Fernando Valley. So Jim Rome is never going to go nearly as deep as juxtaposition. Okay, Jim Rome is a Cub Scout compared to me. All right, and I would know because I was litigation support in one of the biggest steroid lawsuits in the history of sport, and Jim Rome wasn't. If there, believe me, if there's a scandal that's going to be dug into by lawyers, no one is going to call Jim Rome or Rich Eisen or Dan Patrick. They're going to call juxtaposition because then they're going to get all the real facts of life. But I want you to know that the architecture involving sports entertainment is exactly the same architecture as in um, the Hollywood star making program of getting a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. promoting films for Netflix, films for the big screen, which has gone away, and television shows and radio shows and Broadway stage productions. That entertainment is entertainment. Porn is no different than the NFL, okay, or the Tour de France, or the Liège-Bastogne-Liège Classic, or the Tour of Lombardia, or World Cup soccer. The biggest sport in the world is World Cup soccer. The biggest sport in the world is not football. It's World Cup soccer. World Cup football. That's the biggest sport in the world. And there is massive gambling, doping, cheating, lying, and concealment going on in World Cup soccer and tennis and the Olympics. Okay? Marion Jones and Lance Armstrong and Tim Montgomery are not the only Olympic athletes who took drugs. All of them did. Look at Bruce Jenner, for crying out loud. He got his hormones wrong, did he not? All right, that's my story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. I wanted to use Dianna Marie Rossini really as a scandal, but really as a metaphor. She's both a scandal and she's a metaphor because, as no matter what you think about the bed hopping adulteress Dianna Rossini, that's what I'm calling her. No matter what you think about her, she's no different than any single person in her industry. They're all just like her, and they all cover up their picadillos for each other. Because obviously, Diana is on the ropes and has no credibility now. No one is going to believe anything she has said in the last 18 years. Okay. She's been lying like a rug for her entire career. For her entire career since she graduated from, if she did graduate, I don't even know if she graduated from George Mason University. I don't know if she graduated or not. She played a lot of sports, which means I know she didn't do her homework. She's a goof off. She's a party girl. Okay. So, but no matter whether she is or she isn't, every single person like OJ Simpson and Bruce Jenner and Al Michaels and Howard Cosell and Frank Gifford, who played football as a quarterback in the NFL for the New York Giants or the New York Jets, playing for the New York Jets, I believe, they're all party boys, right? They take drugs, they work out, they play football, and then they go bed hopping. That's what they do. If you don't believe me, talk to their spouses. All right, go talk to their spouses. Thanks for listening. Do like and share my videos. As you can imagine, this gumshoe detective, this gumshoe investigative journalist who feeds the truth to the fake journalists like Gwen Knapp, like Lance Williams, like Mark Fainor-Rada, like Ken Rosenthal of baseball and the Athletic, like Ray Ratto. Um, They do exactly what Rich Eisen and Keith Olbermann and Dan Patrick do, which is they cast a shadow on the truth. They are the builders of the metaverse for sports, the matrix of mendacity. That's what all those people do to need to draw a paycheck in sport entertainment. They have to present a fake image of what is a dirty, doped, fixed, and rigged sporting. It's not sports. If you want to play sports, get all the money out of it and go play local basketball, local baseball, local cycling races with no prizes other than what your local vendors will donate. And then you can have a straight up race and have a straight up winner. And you don't need any sporting reporters there to tell you what happened. All you have to do is spectate and you can see for yourself. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Tip of the hat to you. Bye now.